The flour sack hit the dirt with a dull thud, splitting open at Adelaide Gardner's feet as laughter erupted from the general store porch behind her. She stood frozen in the middle of Main Street in Reno, Nevada, watching the white powder settle into the dry earth while her cheeks burned hotter than the June sun beating down on her shoulders. It was 1881, and she had just turned 23 years old last month, though right now she felt about as small as a child being scolded for something she could not help. Maybe if you were not carrying so much weight already, you could manage a simple flour sack, Mrs. Henderson called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness that made Adelaide's stomach twist. The other women on the porch tittered behind their hands, their eyes cutting into Adelaide like sharp knives. Adelaide bent down to gather what she could of the spilled flour, her hands shaking as she tried to scoop the precious ingredient back into the torn burlap. Her dress pulled tight across her back and hips, and she heard another whisper float across the dusty street. She had always been heavier than other women, with generous curves and a soft roundness that her mother had once called beautiful before the fever took her 5 years ago. But here in Reno, where women were scarce and standards were somehow even higher, Adelaide had learned that her body was something to be ashamed of rather than celebrated. "Leave it," a deep voice said from somewhere above her. Adelaide looked up, squinting against the bright Nevada sun to see a tall figure blocking the light. As her eyes adjusted, she made out a man in his mid-20s, maybe 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of whiskey. He wore dusty trail clothes and a black hat that had seen better days, and there was something in his expression that was neither pity nor mockery, just straightforward kindness. "I cannot just leave it," Adelaide said, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. "Flour costs money." "It is ruined anyway," the man said, and he crouched down beside her, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something earthy like rain on desert sand. "Let me buy you a new sack. Name's Preston Andrews." Adelaide sat back on her heels, studying this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. His face was all hard angles and sharp lines, but his eyes were gentle when they met hers. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, giving him a slightly dangerous look that probably served him well in a place like this. "I do not need charity," she said, even though she did, even though the coins in her pocket were the last she had, until she could sell more of her sewing work. Preston Andrews stood up and offered her his hand, seeming unbothered by her pride. "Not charity, common decency. Those women up there should be ashamed of themselves, carrying on like that." Adelaide glanced back at the porch where Mrs. Henderson and her circle had fallen silent, watching this interaction with narrowed eyes and pursed lips. She knew what they were thinking, could practically hear their thoughts. What would a man like that want with a woman like her? The question had been asked before in different ways, every time a man had shown her even the smallest kindness. She took Preston's hand and let him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of someone who worked hard for everything he had. When she was standing, she realized she came up to his shoulder and that he was still holding her hand, his thumb brushing once across her knuckles before he released her. "Adelaide Gardner," she said finally, "and I would appreciate a new sack of flour if you are serious about the offer." "As serious as a heart attack," Preston said, and there was the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Come on, I will carry it for you too." They walked together back toward the general store, and Adelaide felt every eye on them as they climbed the steps. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone red, whether from indignation or sunburn. Adelaide could not tell. Preston tipped his hat to the women with exaggerated politeness, then held the door open for Adelaide to pass through into the dim coolness of the store. Inside, Mr. Peterson looked up from his ledger with raised eyebrows. He was a fair man. Adelaide had to give him that, even if his wife was one of the worst gossips in town. "Miss Gardner," he said, "I saw what happened out there. I am sorry about the flour. That sack must have been damaged already." "It is fine," Adelaide said quietly. "I just need another one." Preston stepped forward, placing coins on the counter. "I will take 2 sacks and put whatever else Miss Gardner needs on my bill." "I do not need anything else," Adelaide protested, but Preston was already walking toward the back of the store where the flour was kept. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "You are new in town, Mr." "Just passing through," Preston said, hoisting a flour sack over his shoulder like it weighed nothing at all. "Been working cattle drives up north. Thought I would see what Reno had to offer before heading back out." "Not much to offer except dust and desperate men," Mr. Peterson said with a dry laugh. "But we have got a decent saloon and a church, if you are the praying type." Preston grabbed the second flour sack and brought both to the counter. "I will take some coffee too, and dried beans if you have them. Bacon, sugar." Adelaide watched as he rattled off a list of supplies, her mind spinning with confusion and something else, something warmer that she did not want to name yet. This man was a stranger. He had no reason to help her, no reason to stand up for her against the town gossips. Men like Preston Andrews did not notice women like her, and when they did, it was usually for the wrong reasons. But when he finished his business with Mr. Peterson and turned back to her, there was nothing but honest warmth in his expression. "Where am I taking this flour, Miss Gardner?" "You do not have to," she started, but he was already heading for the door, balancing both sacks with ease. "I know I do not have to," he said. "I want to. Now are you going to make me wander around town looking lost, or are you going to show me where you live?" Adelaide felt her lips twitch despite herself. "It is not far, just down by the creek past the old mill." They walked together through the afternoon heat, past the saloons with their tinny piano music, and the boarding houses with their peeling paint. Adelaide was acutely aware of the stares they were attracting, of the way conversations stopped as they passed and then resumed in urgent whispers once they were out of earshot. This would be all over town by supper time. Adelaide Gardner, walking with a strange man. Adelaide Gardner, who should be grateful for any attention at all, given her size. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the sound of Preston's boots on the wooden boardwalk, the creak of the flour sacks as he shifted them. When they reached the dirt path that led down to her small cabin, she noticed the way he looked around, taking in the garden she had planted, the chickens scratching in their pen, the washing hanging on the line. "This is yours?" he asked. "It was my mother's," Adelaide said. "She left it to me when she passed. It is not much, but it is mine." Preston nodded slowly, as if understanding something important. He followed her to the door and waited while she unlocked it, then carried the flour sacks inside to her small kitchen. The cabin was neat as a pin, everything in its place, with bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters and her sewing projects folded carefully on a table by the window. "It is nice," Preston said, setting the flour down gently. "Feels like a home." Adelaide did not know what to say to that. She stood in the doorway, suddenly very aware that she was alone in her house with a man she had met less than an hour ago. But Preston just dusted off his hands and headed back toward the door, pausing when he reached her. "Thank you for letting me help," he said. "I know you did not ask for it, but it felt like the right thing to do." "Why?" The word came out before Adelaide could stop it. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me." Preston looked at her for a long moment, his whiskey eyes searching her face. "Because those women were cruel, and you did not deserve it." Because my mama raised me to stand up for people when they are being treated poorly. And because, he paused, his voice dropping lower, you have got the kindest eyes I have seen in a long time, and I thought maybe I could make your day a little better. Adelaide's heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. Oh. I am staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street, Preston said. Mrs. O'Malley's place. If you need anything, or if those women bother you again, you come find me. All right, Adelaide nodded, not trusting her voice. Preston tipped his hat to her and stepped out into the late afternoon sun, walking back up the path toward town with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders relaxed. Adelaide watched him go, then closed the door and leaned against it, her mind reeling. Over the next week, Adelaide saw Preston Andrews around town more often than seemed coincidental. He would tip his hat to her when she passed by with her basket of mending to deliver, or stop to make conversation when she was drawing water from the town well. He never said anything improper, never made her feel uncomfortable, but there was an attention in the way he looked at her that made her pulse quicken. The other women noticed too, of course. Mrs. Henderson made it her personal mission to warn Adelaide about the dangers of strange men. Though Adelaide suspected, she was more concerned about the impropriety of someone like Adelaide catching a man's interest, when Mrs. Henderson's own daughter was still unmarried at 28. Men like that do not stick around, Mrs. Henderson said one morning, cornering Adelaide outside the bakery. They are drifters, looking for easy conquests. You would do well to remember your place, Adelaide. My place, Adelaide repeated, feeling a spark of anger kindle in her chest. A woman of your size cannot afford to be picky, but that does not mean you should throw yourself at the first man who shows you kindness. It is unseemly. Adelaide felt her face go hot, but before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. Mrs. Henderson, is it? Preston had appeared beside them, his expression pleasant but his eyes hard. I could not help but overhear you giving Miss Gardner advice she did not ask for. Mrs. Henderson drew herself up, all false propriety and indignation. I am simply looking out for her welfare, Mr. Andrews. As a pillar of this community, I feel responsible for our young women. That is interesting, Preston said, his tone conversational, because from where I stand, it looks more like you are trying to make Miss Gardner feel bad about herself. Now I may be new here, but where I come from we call that bullying, and I do not have much patience for bullies. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. Well, I never. Maybe you should start, Preston said. He offered his arm to Adelaide. Miss Gardner, would you allow me to walk you home? Adelaide took his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him even through the fabric of his shirt. They walked away from Mrs. Henderson, who stood sputtering on the boardwalk, and Adelaide found herself fighting the urge to laugh. You did not have to do that, she said when they were out of earshot. Yes, I did, Preston said firmly. Adelaide, can I ask you something? I suppose so. Why do you let them talk to you like that? Adelaide was quiet for a moment, watching the dust swirl around their feet as they walked. Because they are right, she said finally. I am heavy. I am not like the other women here. And in a place where there are 3 men for every woman, the fact that I am 23 and unmarried tells you everything you need to know about my prospects. Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. The sun was behind him, creating a halo of light around his dark hair. They are not right, he said, his voice intense. They are cruel and small-minded, and they are taking out their own miseries on you because it makes them feel better about themselves. You do not understand what it is like, Adelaide said, pulling her arm away. You are a man. You can look however you want and no one says a word. But women like me, we are supposed to be small and delicate and pretty, and I am none of those things. "You are wrong about that," Preston said. "You are pretty, beautiful even, and I do not give a damn about small and delicate." Adelaide stared at him, her heart pounding. "You do not mean that." "I do not say things I do not mean." Preston took a step closer, and Adelaide could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "Adelaide, I have been trying to work up the courage to ask you something all week." "What is that? Would you have dinner with me?" "Nothing fancy, just supper at the boarding house. Mrs. O'Malley sets a good table, and I would like to get to know you better. The real you, not what those gossips say you are." Adelaide wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. But years of criticism and rejection had built walls around her heart, walls designed to protect her from exactly this kind of disappointment. "Why?" she asked again. "Why me?" Preston smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look younger. "Because you are kind to your chickens when you do not think anyone is watching. Because you hum when you hang your washing, and it is the prettiest sound I have ever heard. Because you make the garden outside your cabin bloom in this desert heat, which seems like magic to me. And because when you smile, which is not often enough, it feels like the sun coming out from behind clouds." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever noticed the small things she did, the small joys she found in her solitary life. "I do not know," she whispered. "People will talk." "Let them talk," Preston said. "I will be gone from here soon enough anyway, back on the trail. But while I am here, I would like to spend time with you if you will let me." The reminder that he would be leaving should have made Adelaide more cautious, but instead it had the opposite effect. If he was leaving anyway, what did it matter what people said? She could have this one thing, this one bright moment, before going back to her quiet life. "All right," she said. "Dinner? But just dinner." "Just dinner," Preston agreed, though his smile suggested he hoped for more. That evening, Adelaide changed her dress 3 times before settling on her blue calico, the one that her mother had always said brought out her eyes. She pinned up her dark hair, then let it down, then pinned it up again. Her hands were shaking as she walked to Mrs. O'Malley's boarding house, and she almost turned back twice. But Preston was waiting for her on the porch, wearing a clean shirt and looking nervous himself, and that steadied her somehow. He offered his arm and led her into the dining room, where Mrs. O'Malley had set up a small table by the window, away from the other boarders. "I may have asked for a favor," Preston admitted as they sat down. "Mrs. O'Malley is a romantic." Adelaide laughed, surprising herself. "Is that what this is? Romance?" "I am hoping it could be," Preston said honestly, "if you give me a chance." Over roast chicken and potatoes they talked. Preston told her about growing up in Texas, about his father's ranch, and how he had left after his parents died in a fire 3 years ago. He talked about the cattle drives, the months on the trail, the loneliness of that life. "I thought it was what I wanted," he said, pushing peas around his plate. "Freedom, no ties, just me and the open range, but lately I have been feeling like something is missing." "What?" Adelaide asked. Preston looked at her, his gaze steady. "A home, a reason to stay in one place. Someone to come back to." Adelaide's throat felt tight. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Preston said. "I know you are brave, even when you do not feel like it. I know you are talented because I have seen your sewing work in Mr. Peterson's store and it is beautiful. I know you loved your mother because you keep her cabin exactly like she would have wanted. And I know that you deserve better than what this town has given you." "Preston," Adelaide said, then stopped, not knowing how to continue. He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles like he had that first day. "I know this is fast. I know I am probably breaking every rule of courtship, but Adelaide, I have never felt like this before. Like I found something I did not even know I was looking for. Adelaide felt a tear slide down her cheek. I am afraid, she whispered. Afraid that this is not real. Afraid that you will realize you made a mistake, that you could do so much better than me. Preston stood up and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye to eye. Listen to me, he said, his voice fierce. You are not a mistake. You are not second best. You are perfect exactly as you are, and anyone who has made you feel otherwise is a fool. But I am heavy, Adelaide said, the word catching in her throat. And I know what men want, and I am not that. What do you think men want? Preston asked gently. Adelaide gestured at herself helplessly. Someone small. Someone who looks good on their arm. Someone who can give them children, lots of children, to carry on their name. Preston was quiet for a moment, his thumb still moving in slow circles on her hand. Can I tell you something? He asked. Something I have not told many people, Adelaide nodded. I do not want children, Preston said. I never have. I know that probably makes me strange, that most men are supposed to want sons and heirs and all of that. But I have seen too many children left orphaned on the trail, too many women die in childbirth. And honestly, I just do not have that desire in me. I want a partner, a companion, someone to build a life with, but I do not need children to feel complete. Adelaide stared at him, her mind reeling. You are serious, as serious as I have ever been about anything. Preston stood up and pulled her to her feet, his hands warm on her arms. Adelaide, you are perfect to me. Your size, your shape, the fact that you are strong and capable and kind, that is what I want. That is what I see when I look at you. I do not know what to say, Adelaide whispered. Say you will give me a chance, Preston said. Say you will let me court you properly, for as long as I am in town. And then, maybe, say you will consider leaving with me when I go. Leave Reno. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. There is nothing for you here but cruelty and judgment, Preston said. But there is a whole country out there, Adelaide. Places where no one knows you, where you could start fresh, where you could be happy. Adelaide thought about her cabin, her garden, the grave up on the hill where her mother rested. She thought about the women who whispered about her, the men who looked through her like she did not exist. She thought about the sewing she did for pennies, the lonely evenings, the slow march of days that all looked the same. And then she thought about Preston's hand in hers, about the way he looked at her like she hung the moon, about the possibility of something more than this narrow, painful life. Yes, she said. Yes, I will give you a chance. Preston's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He pulled her close, and Adelaide let herself sink into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him and the steady beat of his heart against her ear. For the first time in years, she felt safe. For the first time in years, she felt wanted. Over the following weeks, Adelaide and Preston became inseparable. He would meet her every morning to help her with her chores, hauling water and chopping wood while she fed the chickens and tended her garden. In the afternoons, they would walk along the creek, talking about everything and nothing. Preston told her about the places he had been, the things he had seen. Adelaide told him about her dreams of having a dress shop, of creating beautiful things that made women feel special. You should do it, Preston said one afternoon as they sat under a cottonwood tree watching the water flow past. Open a shop, I mean. Where would I do that? Adelaide asked. Not here. No one in Reno would buy from me. Then we will go somewhere else, Preston said. Sacramento, maybe. Or San Francisco. Somewhere big enough that you would have customers, but small enough that you could make a name for yourself. Adelaide looked at him, at the serious set of his jaw and the determination in his eyes. You really mean it, do not you? About leaving together? I have never meant anything more in my life, Preston said. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Adelaide, I love you. I know it has only been a few weeks, but I love you, and I want to build a life with you wherever that might be." Adelaide felt her breath catch. "You love me." "I love you," Preston repeated. "I love your laugh, which I am hearing more of every day. I love the way you care for everything around you, from your chickens to your garden to the stray cat that showed up last week. I love how talented you are, how strong you are, how you keep going even when the world tries to beat you down. I love all of you, Adelaide Gardner, and I do not care who knows it." Adelaide was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she launched herself at Preston, nearly knocking him backward. He caught her easily, his arms wrapping around her and holding her tight. "I love you too," she said against his shoulder. "I did not think I could, did not think I should, but I do. I love you, Preston Andrews." He pulled back just enough to kiss her, his lips gentle against hers, and Adelaide felt something in her chest crack open, some tight knot of pain and shame that she had been carrying for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not want to wait. Marry me, Adelaide." Adelaide laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." They were married a week later by the circuit preacher, with only Mrs. O'Malley and Mr. Peterson as witnesses. Mrs. Henderson and her circle were scandalized, of course, spreading rumors that Adelaide must be pregnant or that Preston was marrying her for her land. But Adelaide found that she did not care anymore. Let them talk. She was leaving anyway, starting a new life with a man who loved her exactly as she was. The night of their wedding, Preston carried her over the threshold of her cabin, now their cabin, and set her down gently in the middle of the small kitchen. Adelaide felt suddenly nervous, very aware of her body and all its imperfections, but Preston just cupped her face in his hands and kissed her slowly. "You are beautiful," he murmured against her lips. "You are my wife, and you are beautiful, and I am the luckiest man alive." He made love to her with such tenderness that Adelaide cried again, overwhelmed by the feeling of being cherished, of being wanted not in spite of her body but because of it, because she was Adelaide and he was Preston, and they had found each other in this dusty Nevada town against all odds. Afterward they lay tangled together in her small bed, Preston's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder while she listened to his heartbeat. "Tell me about Texas," she said softly. "About your family ranch." Preston was quiet for a moment. "It burned 5 years ago," he said finally. "Lightning strike during a dry spell. My parents were inside, asleep. They never made it out." "Oh, Preston," Adelaide whispered, holding him tighter. "I tried to save it after the ranch, I mean, tried to rebuild, but everywhere I looked I saw them. Heard my mother's voice in the kitchen, my father's laugh in the barn. It was too much. So I sold what was left and took to the trail." "Do you regret it?" Adelaide asked. "No," Preston said. "Because if I had stayed, I never would have met you, and you are worth everything I lost and more." They spent 2 more weeks in Reno, preparing for their departure. Adelaide sold her cabin to a young couple newly arrived from Missouri, receiving enough money to give them a solid start wherever they ended up. She packed up her mother's belongings, the things she could not bear to leave behind, and said goodbye to her mother's grave. "I am going to be happy, Mama," she whispered, kneeling in the dirt beside the weathered headstone. "I found someone who loves me, really loves me. I wish you could have met him. I think you would have liked him." Preston waited by the wagon, giving her privacy for this final farewell. When she came back down the hill, her eyes were red, but her step was steady. He helped her up onto the wagon seat and took up the reins. They left Reno on a clear morning in late July, the sun just beginning to peek over the mountains to the east. Adelaide looked back once at the town that had been her home for so long, at the narrow streets, and the people who had made her feel small. Then she turned forward, looking at the open road ahead and the man beside her, and she did not look back again. They traveled west toward California, taking their time. Preston had enough money saved from his cattle drive work to keep them comfortable, and Adelaide sewed as they went, selling her work in the small towns they passed through. People noticed them, of course. A woman of Adelaide's size was always noticed. But Preston's presence at her side, the way he looked at her with such obvious adoration, seemed to shield her from the worst of the judgment. In Sacramento, they found a small house to rent near the river. It was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it had good light and space for Adelaide to set up her sewing. Preston found work at a lumber mill, hard physical labor that left him exhausted at the end of each day but paid well. At night, they would sit on their porch and watch the river flow by, talking about their days and making plans for the future. Preston wanted to save enough to buy Adelaide a proper shop space. Adelaide wanted to expand beyond simple mending and start creating original designs. "We could make a real go of it," Preston said one evening, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders as they rocked slowly on the porch swing he had built. "A dress shop with your name on it. Gardner's Fine Fashions or something like that." "Andrews Fashions," Adelaide corrected. "I am an Andrews now, remember?" Preston kissed the top of her head. "How could I forget? Best decision I ever made." Life in Sacramento was not perfect. There were still people who stared, still women who whispered behind their hands. But there were also customers who appreciated Adelaide's skill, who came back again and again because they liked the way her dresses fit and the care she put into every stitch. There were neighbors who greeted them warmly and invited them to Sunday dinners. There was Mrs. Chen from down the street, who taught Adelaide how to make proper dumplings and never once commented on her size. A year after they left Reno, Adelaide opened her shop. It was small, just a single room on a busy street, but it was hers. Preston had saved every penny he could and surprised her with the lease on her 25th birthday. Adelaide had cried when he presented her with the key, overwhelmed by his faith in her and his determination to help her succeed. The shop did well. Better than well, actually. Women came from all over Sacramento to have Adelaide make their dresses, impressed by her eye for design and her ability to make any figure look its best. She had a particular gift for helping women who, like her, did not fit the conventional ideals of beauty. She knew how to cut fabric to flatter, how to use color and detail to draw the eye, how to make every woman who walked into her shop feel beautiful. "You have a real talent," Preston said one evening as they closed up the shop together. He had taken to helping her in the evenings after his mill shift, sweeping floors and managing the books. "These women love you. They love feeling good about themselves," Adelaide said, carefully folding a finished dress. "I just help them see what I see." "Which is what?" Preston asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "That every woman is beautiful," Adelaide said, leaning back against him. "That our worth is not determined by our dress size or the shape of our bodies. That we deserve to feel special and valued, exactly as we are." Preston turned her around in his arms, his hands warm on her hips. "You are amazing, you know that? You turned your pain into something that helps other people. That is a gift, Adelaide." Adelaide kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. 3 years ago, she had been standing in the dirt in Reno, covered in spilled flour and fighting back tears while cruel women laughed at her. Now she was here in her own shop, with a husband who adored her and a business that was thriving. Sometimes the change was so dramatic, it took her breath away. Time passed, marked by the changing seasons and the steady growth of Adelaide's business. She hired 2 assistants to help with the increased workload, young women who reminded her of herself at that age, uncertain and looking for a place to belong. She taught them her techniques, paid them fairly, and created a workspace where they felt valued. Preston left the lumber mill after 2 years and became Adelaide's full-time business partner, handling the financial side of things and managing the growing number of wholesale orders from shops in other towns. They were a team, complementing each other perfectly. Where Adelaide was creative and emotional, Preston was practical and steady. Where Preston sometimes got too focused on the numbers, Adelaide reminded him of the human element, the women whose lives they were touching. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Preston took Adelaide to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Sacramento. They had come a long way from Mrs. O'Malley's boarding house, and as Adelaide sat across from her husband in her finest dress, she marveled at the journey they had taken together. "I have something for you," Preston said after they had ordered. He pulled out a small velvet box and slid it across the table. Adelaide opened it to find a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a sewing needle. She gasped, touching the pendant with gentle fingers. "Preston, it is beautiful." "I had it made special," Preston said, "because you took your pain and turned it into something beautiful, because you are an artist, Adelaide, and you deserve to be recognized as such." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes as Preston stood up and came around the table to fasten the necklace around her neck. His fingers were gentle on her skin, and when he was done, he pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "I love you," he murmured. "Today, tomorrow, always." "I love you too," Adelaide whispered. "More than I ever thought possible." Life continued its steady march forward. The shop prospered, their savings grew, and their love deepened with each passing year. They bought a house, a real house with multiple bedrooms and a yard for Adelaide's garden. They made friends, became pillars of their community, and built a life that was fuller and richer than anything Adelaide had imagined back in Reno. The question of children came up occasionally, usually from well-meaning neighbors or customers who assumed that a married couple would naturally want to expand their family. Each time, Preston would calmly explain that they were happy as they were, that children were not in their plans. Some people accepted this with grace. Others looked at them with confusion or pity, unable to understand how a couple could be complete without children. But Adelaide never doubted their decision. She had Preston, her shop, her work that mattered. She had friendships with the women she employed and the customers she served. She had a life that was meaningful and fulfilling, and she did not need children to validate her existence or her marriage. One afternoon, nearly 8 years after they had left Reno, a familiar face appeared in Adelaide's shop. Adelaide was helping a customer when she looked up and saw Mrs. Henderson standing in the doorway, older and grayer than Adelaide remembered, but still carrying herself with that air of superiority. Adelaide felt her stomach drop, old insecurities rising up like ghosts. But then Preston's hand was on her shoulder, steady and reassuring, and she remembered who she was now. Not the frightened girl standing in the dirt, but a successful businesswoman with a husband who loved her and a life she had built with her own 2 hands. "Mrs. Henderson," Adelaide said calmly. "What brings you to Sacramento?" Mrs. Henderson stepped into the shop, looking around with barely concealed surprise. "I am visiting my daughter," she said. "She married a banker here. I heard there was a dress shop run by someone from Reno and thought I would see if it was true." "It is true," Adelaide said. "I own this shop. My husband and I have been here for 8 years now." Mrs. Henderson's eyes flickered to Preston, who stood protectively close to Adelaide, his expression neutral but his eyes hard. "I see," she said. "I must admit I am surprised." When you left Reno so suddenly, we all thought. You thought we would fail, Adelaide finished for her. That I would come crawling back, or that Preston would realize he had made a mistake and leave me. Is that about right? Mrs. Henderson had the grace to look uncomfortable. We were concerned for your welfare. No, you were not, Adelaide said, and there was steel in her voice now. You were cruel, Mrs. Henderson. You and your friends made my life miserable because it made you feel better about yourselves, but I am not that scared girl anymore. I built this business from nothing, and I have helped hundreds of women feel beautiful when society told them they were not good enough. That is my legacy. What is yours? Mrs. Henderson opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked around the shop, at the beautiful dresses on display, at the bustling workspace visible through the back door, at Adelaide standing tall and proud with Preston at her side. I suppose I was wrong about you, she said finally. Congratulations on your success, Mrs. Andrews. She left without ordering anything, and Adelaide watched her go with a mixture of triumph and sadness. There was no satisfaction in being proven right, she realized. Mrs. Henderson was still the same bitter, small-minded woman she had always been, just older now. Adelaide had won not by making Mrs. Henderson see her worth, but by refusing to let Mrs. Henderson's opinion matter. You were magnificent, Preston said once the door had closed behind their visitor. He pulled Adelaide into his arms, holding her tight. I am so proud of you. Adelaide buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. I could not have done any of this without you, she said. You saved me, Preston. No, Preston said firmly, pulling back to look at her. You saved yourself. I just loved you while you did it. That night, as they lay in bed together, Adelaide thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about the long, winding road that had brought her from that dusty street in Reno to this comfortable home in Sacramento. She thought about all the women she had helped, all the lives she had touched, all the love she had given and received. Preston, she said into the darkness. He was half asleep, his arm heavy across her waist. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for loving me when I could not love myself. Thank you for building this life with me. Preston tightened his hold on her. Best thing I ever did, he murmured. You are my home, Adelaide. Always have been, always will be. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Adelaide's shop expanded to 3 locations across California, each one managed by women she had trained and mentored. She published a book on dress design that became a bestseller among seamstresses and fashion-conscious women. Preston's business acumen helped them invest wisely, securing their financial future and allowing them to give generously to causes they cared about. They traveled when they could, seeing the country that had seemed so vast and frightening when they first left Reno. They visited New York and Chicago, San Francisco and Portland. Everywhere they went, Adelaide noted the fashions, the fabrics, the ways that women presented themselves to the world. She took these observations back to Sacramento and incorporated them into her designs, always evolving, always growing. Their marriage remained strong through it all. There were arguments, of course, moments of frustration or misunderstanding, but they always came back to each other, to the love that had brought them together in that dusty Nevada town so many years ago. They celebrated their 10th anniversary, then their 15th, marking each milestone with gratitude for what they had built together. Adelaide was 38 years old when she received a letter from Reno. It was from Mr. Peterson, the general store owner, informing her that Mrs. Henderson had passed away. The funeral had already happened, but he thought Adelaide would want to know. The letter went on to say that several of the women from that old circle had expressed regret over how they had treated Adelaide. though whether that regret was genuine or merely inspired by Adelaide's success, Mr. Peterson could not say. Adelaide read the letter twice, then set it aside with a mixture of emotions she could not quite name. She felt no joy at Mrs. Henderson's passing, but no real sadness either. Mostly, she felt a sense of closure, as if a chapter of her life that should have ended years ago was finally, truly complete. "Are you all right?" Preston asked that evening, finding Adelaide standing at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the garden below. "I am more than all right," Adelaide said, turning to face him. "I am happy, Preston, truly, deeply happy. And I realize today that I have been happy for a long time now, so long that I almost forgot what it was like to be anything else." Preston crossed the room and took her hands in his. "You deserve every bit of happiness you have," he said. "You earned it, Adelaide, you fought for it." "We fought for it," Adelaide corrected. "Together." On their 20th anniversary, Preston surprised Adelaide with a trip back to Nevada. Not to Reno, but to Lake Tahoe, where they rented a cabin overlooking the crystal-clear water. It was beautiful and peaceful, a far cry from the dusty streets where they had first met. They spent a week there, walking along the shore and sitting by the fire at night, reminiscing about their journey together. Preston had gone gray at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that Adelaide loved. Adelaide herself had softened with age, her face showing the lines of laughter and love rather than the stress and shame she had carried as a younger woman. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we had never met?" Adelaide asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "No," Preston said immediately, "because I cannot imagine a life without you in it. You are woven into every part of who I am, Adelaide. Without you, I would still be that lost, angry man wandering from town to town, looking for something I could not name. And I would still be in Reno," Adelaide said softly, "small and scared and convinced I did not deserve better." Preston pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple. "I am glad we found each other," he said. "Even if it was just luck, even if it was chance. I am glad that flour sack split open and I happened to be walking by. I am glad I had the courage to speak to you, and I am glad you had the courage to say yes." "Me too," Adelaide whispered. "Me too." They returned to Sacramento renewed, and ready for whatever came next. Adelaide began training a successor to eventually take over the day-to-day operations of her shops, wanting to ensure that the business would continue even after she was no longer able to run it herself. Preston started writing his memoirs, chronicling their journey from Reno to Sacramento and the lessons they had learned along the way. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm, marked by the changing seasons and the steady pulse of their shared days. They took up new hobbies, traveled more, and spent long evenings on their porch watching the river flow by, just as they had when they were newlyweds in their first small house. Adelaide was 45 when she realized she was finally, completely at peace with her body. It had taken decades, thousands of hours of work on herself and her mindset, but standing in front of her mirror one morning, she looked at her reflection and felt only love. Her body had carried her through 45 years of life. It had survived cruelty and hardship, had learned to sew and create, had loved and been loved. It was strong and capable and hers, and she was grateful for it. She told Preston this that evening, and he had held her close and said, "I am glad you see what I have always seen. You are perfect, Adelaide Andrews, perfect exactly as you are." The years continued their steady march. Adelaide and Preston celebrated their 25th anniversary, then their 30th. They became grandparents in a way, to the children of the women who worked for Adelaide, treating them with the affection of favorite aunts and uncles. They established a scholarship fund for young women wanting to learn a trade, giving others the opportunities they had fought so hard to create for themselves. Preston's health began to decline when he was in his mid-60s, a slow weakening that neither of them wanted to acknowledge but could not ignore. The doctor said it was his heart, worn out from years of hard labor and the stress of building a life from nothing. Preston took the news calmly, his main concern being what would happen to Adelaide after he was gone. "I will be fine," Adelaide told him firmly, sitting beside his bed in their sun-filled bedroom. "I will be heartbroken, but I will be fine. You taught me how to be strong, Preston. You taught me how to stand on my own 2 feet." "You already knew how," Preston said, his voice weak but his eyes still bright with love. "I just reminded you." He passed away on a cool October morning, Adelaide holding his hand and telling him stories of their life together, making sure the last thing he heard was how much he was loved and how grateful she was for every moment they had shared. Adelaide was 62 years old and felt like a part of her had been ripped away. But she did not crumble. She grieved deeply and fully, letting herself feel the weight of her loss. But she also remembered what Preston had said, that she had saved herself, that she was strong enough to stand alone if she had to. She continued running her business, though she stepped back from the daily operations and let her protégés take the lead. She spent more time with the children in her life, teaching them to sew and telling them stories about the cowboy who had loved their Adelaide when no one else saw her worth. She traveled, seeing the places that she and Preston had always meant to visit but never quite found the time, and she wrote. She wrote down their story, every detail she could remember, from the flour sacks splitting open in the street to Preston's final words. She wrote about love and resilience, about overcoming judgment and building a life on your own terms. She wrote for the girl she had been, scared and alone in Reno, and for every other woman who had ever been made to feel less than because of her body. The book was published when Adelaide was 65, and it became a surprise success. Women wrote to her from all over the country, thanking her for telling her story, for showing them that happiness and love were possible even when the world said otherwise. Adelaide answered every letter personally, knowing how much it would have meant to her younger self to receive such encouragement. Adelaide lived to be 83 years old, surrounded by the people she had mentored and loved, in the house she had built with Preston. On her last day, she sat in her garden with the sun on her face, thinking about the long, winding road that had brought her from that dusty street in Reno to this moment of perfect peace. She thought about Preston, gone now for nearly 20 years, and smiled. He had told her she was perfect, that he did not want children, that all he wanted was her. And he had spent every day of their marriage proving those words true, loving her with a constancy and devotion that had transformed her life. She thought about all the women she had helped, all the lives she had touched, all the love she had given and received. She thought about the business she had built, the legacy she was leaving behind, the scholarship fund that would help young women for generations to come. And she thought about that girl standing in the dirt, covered in spilled flour, convinced that she was unworthy of love or happiness. If she could go back and tell that girl one thing, Adelaide knew what it would be, that she was strong enough to survive anything, that her worth was not determined by her body or other people's opinions, that somewhere out there, a cowboy with whiskey eyes and a kind heart was walking toward her, ready to love her exactly as she was. Adelaide closed her eyes in the warm sunshine, feeling the weight of her 83 years and the lightness of a life well lived. She had been ridiculed, judged, and made to feel small. But she had risen above it all, had built a beautiful life with a man who saw her worth when no one else did. She had been loved deeply and had loved deeply in return, and in the end, that was all that mattered. As the afternoon light faded into evening, Adelaide Gardner Andrews passed peacefully in her garden, surrounded by the flowers she had tended for decades and the memories of a love that had changed everything. Her legacy lived on in the women she had mentored, the businesses she had built, and the story she had written, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and refusing to accept the world's narrow definitions of worth and beauty. The dress shops that bore her name continued to thrive, run by women who had learned from Adelaide's example that every person deserved to feel beautiful and valued. The scholarship fund grew, helping hundreds of young women learn trades and build independent lives. And Adelaide's book remained in print, passed from mother to daughter, from friend to friend, inspiring new generations to see themselves with kindness and to demand the love and respect they deserved. In the end, Adelaide's story was not just about a cowboy who loved a woman the world rejected. It was about a woman who learned to love herself, who refused to let cruelty and judgment define her, who built a life of meaning and purpose despite every obstacle in her path. Preston had been her partner in that journey, but Adelaide had been the one to take those first brave steps, to say yes when it would have been easier to stay safe behind her walls. Their love story became legend in Sacramento, told and retold by those who had known them. The house they had shared was preserved and eventually turned into a museum celebrating Adelaide's work and legacy. Young women would come to walk through the rooms where Adelaide had lived and loved, to see her designs and read her words, to draw inspiration from a life that had begun in shame and rejection, but ended in triumph and peace. And sometimes, on quiet afternoons when the sun slanted through the windows just right, visitors would swear they could feel a presence in the old house. Not scary or unsettling, but warm and welcoming, like the feeling of being embraced by someone who loved you unconditionally. Some said it was Adelaide's spirit, still looking after the women who came seeking her wisdom. Others said it was the echo of the love she and Preston had shared, so strong that it had soaked into the very walls of their home. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. Adelaide Gardner Andrews had lived a life that mattered. She had loved and been loved, had helped countless others, and had left the world better than she found it. And in the end, that was the greatest success of all, worth more than any amount of money or fame or societal approval. Her tombstone, placed next to Preston's in the Sacramento cemetery, bore a simple inscription that captured the essence of their love story and the truth Adelaide had fought so hard to believe. She was perfect. She was loved. She was enough. And she was.